Join us today in Yorktown as we visit the Yorktown Visitor Center, go through the museum, and actually walk on those historic battlefields. You won't want to miss it. As you enter the Visitor Center, you're given a map and instructions about the driving tour to the historic battlefields. You're also instructed to download their app, which will take you to the various sites and give you the history. But first, we walk through the Visitor Center Museum. They have so much to see. We're walking through what would have been one of the battleships back then, what it would have looked like while it was in battle. The last 4.5 minutes of this video is a detailed synopsis of what happened at Yorktown. Upstairs in the recreated battleship was a lot of displays, various uniforms. There was a lot of things that you could read about the battle at Yorktown, and also films that you could watch. They had a lot of artifacts on display that had been recovered from the battlefield, and also had Cornwallis's table. It was encased in glass, and it was quite something to see. It was really interesting seeing these artifacts that the archaeologists had uncovered. It really brings history to life. Most people, including ourselves, thought that Yorktown was a battle, but hand-to-hand combat played very small part in the 3-week siege that forced the British to surrender. A siege is more like a game of chess. It's about bottling up your opponent and leaving him no way to escape or resupply, and destroying his defenses rather than confronting in a single battle.
Ready. Fire! Search the gun!
The art of the siege is building rings of earthworks and gun batteries progressively closer to the enemy. When we do our drive around tour, we will actually get to walk among these earthworks, which is absolutely amazing. In the visitor center, I was drawn to this old grandfather clock. It was very old and very ornate. They also had a museum shop. Once we finished walking around the shop, we then went into the small theater and watched a short film before our driving tour.
Without the full honors of war, the British would not be accorded full military honor.
We have no hope to negotiate better terms.
This is in return.
Once we exited the visitor center, we took a walk around the grounds to see what some of the earthworks look like. But later on, during our driving tour, we'll actually get to step foot on the battlefields. There were several old cannons on the property that you could see up close and personal. We'll do our walk to the Victory Monument in another video. Before we headed out to our driving tour, we installed our app, and as you got to each destination, you could listen to the audio, and it gave you a brief description what happened at each spot. Our first stop was the Yorktown National Cemetery, where we got to walk among the gravestones. There are many unknown soldiers buried here. Then we came to the siege lines where we could actually walk among the earthworks. Guys, these are the siege works that they dug by hand with a shovel and a pick. They didn't have modern digging tools like we do today. And this was their second siege line. The first one is just beyond that cemetery. We just came from the cemetery. There's a lot of unknown soldiers buried there. This was the place of the last stand toward the river. This, I don't know what they called it, second siege work. And they would probably have cannons in these little dips and people standing behind them and firing. It's really quite unbelievable to see in person. So this should give you a little perspective on how deep these trenches are. Keith is standing next to one and it's way taller than he is. Can you imagine digging this with shovels and pickaxes? There's just something about walking along these battlefields. You can really see what happened here, and it puts it all into perspective what they had to deal with. So here we're coming upon the siege works that they had, where the Americans put in along the ridge line all these pointy sticks that the other ones had to crawl over to actually get over the ridge line. If you ever get the opportunity to go to the Yorktown Battlefields, do it. There's just something about walking where all this history happened. We're inside the redoubt. It's way deeper in person than it looks on video, which is why you need to see it in person for yourself. Okay, back here was Siege 2. And then we'll pan around here and we'll see where the final siege was. And it is about 500 yards ahead, and we're going to walk up that direction. They're coming from Siege 2 over there. We're going to slowly pan around. And this is the final siege right here on the riverbank. This is rebuilt in the exact spot where it once stood. A lot of it had been washed away due to erosion over the years. As you drive the red route of the Yorktown Battlefield tour, there are 6 stops along the way. One of the stops was the Moore House. This was a house where General George Washington and Cornwallis met to go over the terms of the surrender. It was so surreal standing in the same spot where General George Washington would have stood. Along the route are various informational signs that you can pull over and read as you're driving through. And then we came to our final stop of the driving tour, and that was Surrender Field. And this is where the actual surrender took place, where British soldiers, 7,000 strong, surrendered to the American and French armies on October the 19th, 1781. As we stood on this platform and looked out into the field, this is where the British troops laid down their arms. This was back in the day when people were honest and had honor. Soldiers would march to a designated location and lay their weapons down. There was no last-minute attacks or ambush. It was important back then for soldiers to surrender with dignity, the full honors of war. Along the sides of the platform was a display of surrendered artillery pieces, trophies of war.
It was unusual in that no American fought in the battle. Only French and British were involved. With a fleet of 28 ships of the line, the French blockaded the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and the York River, cutting off British naval access to Yorktown. Admiral Thomas Graves, commanding a British battle fleet of 19 ships of the line from New York, approached the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay on September 5th. When the British ships were sighted, the French admiral, Francois-Joseph de Grasse, ordered his fleet to attack. The ships sailed on a nearly parallel course. Cannon roared. By sunset, sails, masts, and rigging cluttered the decks of the disabled British ships, while the French fleet had suffered minor damage. The fleets drifted south, but did not resume fighting. This sea battle, known as the Battle of the Capes, helped ensure Britain's defeat at Yorktown. Several days later, British Admiral Graves returned to New York to repair his ships. The French fleet returned to the Chesapeake and resumed its blockade. There, joined by a small French fleet commanded by Admiral Paul-Francois de Barras, who had recently sailed from Rhode Island with much of the French artillery. Before the arrival of the French and American armies, General Charles Lord Cornwallis's forces had dug defensive earthworks around Yorktown and at Gloucester Point. Additional advanced earthen forts, called redoubts, protected critical enemy approaches to the British defenses. Meanwhile, in Williamsburg, the Marquis de Lafayette, along with Yorktown resident and Governor of Virginia, Thomas Nelson Jr., prepared for the arrival of General George Washington and the Comte de Rochambeau. By the end of the month, over 17,000 French and American soldiers were under Washington's command. On September 28, 1781, this Allied army marched toward Yorktown. By late afternoon, some of the French regiments encountered Cornwallis's outer defenses. With the arrival of Washington's forces, Lord Cornwallis ordered his troops to retreat from the outer defense. Why? He had received this message from his commander, Sir Henry Clinton. In a few days, the fleet and 5,000 reinforcements will arrive to relieve you. Washington feared those British reinforcements would arrive any day, so his army moved quickly. With picks and shovels, French and American soldiers made the dirt fly. But even so, the first line was not finished until October 9th. Then, the cannon opened fire. The French artillery, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Francois-Marie d'Abbeville, fired the first cannon shot against the British. A few hours later, General Washington fired the first American cannon. From that moment, the Allied cannon fire shook the earth without pause, firing 24 hours a day. Digging continued. 2 days later, the Allies began their second siege line, less than 400 yards from the British. But British redoubts 9 and 10 stood in the way of completing this line. On the night of October 14th, in two brief actions, the Americans captured Redoubt 10, while the French took Redoubt 9. By morning's light, the second line was completed, and the Allied cannon now fired upon the British from point-blank range. On the night of October 16, Cornwallis attempted to move his army across the York River. A sudden storm thwarted the crossing. Lord Cornwallis saw the folly of sacrificing his troops to senseless carnage. He requested terms of surrender. Representatives of the opposing forces met at the Moore House, where the surrender terms were hammered out. On the afternoon of October 19th, the British Army emerged from its damaged garrison. Near the Allied second siege line, Generals Washington and Rochambeau waited to receive the British surrender. Once the British second-in-command, General Charles O'Hara, handed over Cornwallis's sword, the British Army continued south on a road lined by the American and French troops. And on this field, Surrender Field, the British forces grounded their weapons. The 19th of October was a magnificently sunny day for such a spectacle. And as a surgeon in the American Army wrote, it was a glorious day.
If you'd like to see more videos of the historic triangle, click the playlist that just popped up on your screen.